The silence had been going on for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days when Lyra arrived at Thornville. I was counting, in the way of parents who count things they cannot fix. Every morning I knew exactly how long since my daughter had last spoken, the same way I knew how long since Myra had died. Not because I was keeping the count deliberately, but because the count kept itself, the way a wound keeps its own calendar. Senne had stopped speaking the morning after her mother's funeral. She was 4 years old. She had said at breakfast that she was not hungry, and then she had not said anything else, and 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days later she still had not said anything else. The healers said it was grief. The moon readers said it was a holding, that she was keeping something for when she was ready to give it. Old Devris, who had served 3 kings before me and had therefore survived enough to be inclined toward patience, said children sometimes go quiet the way rivers sometimes go underground. They haven't stopped, they're just traveling somewhere you can't see. I had tried everything the healers suggested. Stories at night, which she received without response. Songs, which she listened to with the particular quality of a person who is moved but not prepared to show it. Other children, carefully introduced, whom she tolerated with the dignified composure of a 4-year-old who has decided that socializing is optional. Wolves, she liked the wolves. She would sit with them for hours, which the wolves seemed to consider entirely reasonable. She had not spoken. Lyra arrived on a gray morning in the deep middle of autumn, in a hired cart with 3 trunks of archive materials, and a letter of appointment from the council that I had, frankly, not read very closely. Thornville needed a new archive keeper. Old Sem had retired the previous spring, and the archive tower had been developing the specific chaos of a collection without a custodian, and the council had handled the appointment. I had approved it with the absent efficiency of a man managing a hold, while also managing a grieving daughter and a territory that had learned in 2 years to give its king more room than he probably needed. I did not go to the gate for her arrival. I learned she had arrived because Devris mentioned it at the afternoon council. The new archive keeper is settled in the tower, all well. And I nodded, and we moved on to the border road maintenance question, which was the actual pressing matter of the week. The first time I saw her was the second day. She was in the courtyard, which was not unusual. The archive tower's entrance was in the inner courtyard, and the archive keeper necessarily passed through it. She was looking at the old sundial in the center of the courtyard with the focused interest of a person cataloging something mentally, not admiringly, the specific gaze of someone filing information for later use. She had dark hair, simply dressed. She was wearing what appeared to be a working apron over her dress, which I later discovered she wore almost every day in the archive because archive materials are dusty, and she preferred to keep her better dresses clean, which was entirely practical, and which told me something about her that I did not, at the time, know I was learning. I passed through the courtyard on my way to the East Hall. She glanced up. She gave me the nod of someone acknowledging a person she does not know well, and then went back to the sundial. I realized with a small surprise, not used to being nodded at. I went to the East Hall. The third day, Senne found her. I was told about this afterward, because I was in the council chamber when it happened. The account came from Devris, who had witnessed it from the courtyard steps. Senne had been in the inner courtyard with 2 of the younger wolves. She spent most of her mornings there, the wolves her consistent company, when Lyra came through on her way to the archive tower with a stack of flat document cases under one arm. She was walking quickly, purposefully, the way she always walked, which I would later discover was not hurry but the natural pace of a person who is genuinely interested in getting to where they are going. Senne watched her cross the courtyard. Lyra did not stop. She was not unaware of the child. Devris said she glanced at Senne with the brief, acknowledging attention she gave most things. But she did not alter her course. did not slow to crouch and speak in the particular high-pitched way adults often addressed SENNE, which SENNE had grown to find exhausting. She simply crossed the courtyard, document cases under her arm, and began to climb the tower stairs. SENNE stood up and followed her. Not running, walking, with the deliberate and slightly formal pace of a small person who has made a decision and intends to carry it through. The two younger wolves came with her, as they always did. Devris said Lyra noticed when she reached the tower landing and looked down to find a 4-year-old child and 2 wolves sitting on the stairs below her, looking up with the patient attention of people who have arrived and are waiting for acknowledgement. Lyra had reportedly looked at SENNE for a moment. Then she had said, "I'm going to be working in the archive. Would you like to see it?" SENNE had nodded. "The wolves can come too," Lyra had said, and turned to unlock the archive door. SENNE had been in the archive every morning since. I found out about this 3 days later from Devris, who delivered the information with the careful neutrality of a man who has learned to present things to me in a way that does not resemble hope, because hope, in the past 2 years, had consistently failed to hold. "The archive keeper," he said. "SENNE has been spending her mornings with her." "In the archive," I said. "Yes, she helps with the cataloging apparently." A pause. "Voluntarily." I thought about this. SENNE had not shown interest in any organized activity since before Myra died. She had refused, with polite finality, every structured attempt at engagement. The archive I had been in it twice in my reign, for specific purposes, and it was dim and dusty and full of old records in varying states of organization, not an obvious destination for a 4-year-old. "She's helping with the cataloging," I said. "She hands the archive keeper documents in the order they appear to be needed," Devris said, "which is, apparently, consistently correct." He paused again. "The archive keeper says she has good instincts for organizational logic." I went to the archive tower that afternoon. The tower had 3 floors. The first was receiving and sorting long tables, stacked cases, the organized system of a person who had taken a chaotic collection and begun imposing structure. The second was storage, the shelved and cataloged material. The third, I discovered when I climbed all the way up, was what Lyra had designated the working floor. A large table, good light from the north window, and a system of organization I did not entirely understand, but which had the unmistakable quality of having been thought through rather than improvised. SENNE was sitting at one end of the large table with a stack of document folders beside her, and the 2 younger wolves arranged at her feet. She was sorting the folders by a criterion I could not immediately identify, handing each one across the table to Lyra as she assessed it. Lyra was logging them into a ledger, small, precise handwriting, quick, the pen moving steadily. She was saying as each folder arrived the destination. East shelf, 3rd section, or current period active, or requires cross-reference. Brief, functional, not performing the explanation for SENNE's benefit but simply thinking aloud, which was different, and which SENNE, I understood watching them, was treating as instruction without either of them having established it as such. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Lyra looked up. She saw me and said, with the same easy competence she gave everything, "Alpha King, I'll have an inventory summary ready by the end of the week. The collection is larger than the previous records indicated, but it's in better condition than I expected." "Good," I said. My eyes went to SENNE. SENNE looked at me with the calm assessment she gave most things, then handed another folder to Lyra and went back to the sorting. "She's helpful," Lyra said, writing the destination in the ledger. "Good eye for organizational category." "She doesn't speak," I said. "I know," Lyra said, without any particular weight. "She communicates clearly enough." She held out her hand for the next folder. SENNE placed it precisely in her palm. I watched them for another moment. Something in the composition of the two of them at the table, my daughter's composed, focused face, Lyra's steady attention, the matter-of-fact ease between them, the wolves at Senne's feet with the satisfied posture of animals who are exactly where they are supposed to be, made something in my chest do a thing I had not felt in 2 years, 3 months, and an increasing number of days. It was not the bond. Not yet. It was something adjacent, the specific warmth of watching a person be genuinely good at something that matters without knowing they are being watched. I said, "Carry on." I went back down the stairs. The weeks that followed had a quality I did not have a name for at the time. Senne's days acquired a structure they had lacked for 2 years. Mornings in the archive with Lyra, afternoons in the courtyard with the wolves, which was unchanged. Evenings with me, which were also unchanged. I read to her, she received it. Neither of us pretended the silence wasn't there, but we had learned to inhabit it together without the first year's sharp edges. But the mornings were different. She came to dinner with document dust on her sleeves, which I had to require her to wash off before eating. She brought twice a small document from the archive, things she apparently found interesting and wanted to show me. A map of the Thornville territory from 100 years ago with different border markings, a record of a pack council from 3 generations past with unusual annotations in the margins. She placed them on the table beside my dinner and watched me read them with the focused attention of someone who has brought a gift and is observing whether it lands correctly. Both times it landed correctly. Both times I looked at the map or the record and asked a genuine question about it, and she responded, not in words, but with the efficient system of gesture and expression she had developed, which Lyra, I gathered, had become fluent in. I had not thought of anyone becoming fluent in Senne's silence as a thing that could happen. The healers had always spoken of breaking it, coaxing her back to speech, as if speech was on the other side of a wall she needed to be helped over. Lyra apparently treated the silence as a language, which was different, and which Senne had responded to by communicating more, not less. I went to the archive tower again, and again. Not, I told myself, for any particular reason. I had legitimate interests in the collection's organization. The inventory summary was due. There were records I needed to consult. I told myself these things with the deliberate care of a man who knows what he is doing and is not yet prepared to name it. Lyra received my visits with equanimity. She answered questions about the collection, showed me what she was working on, occasionally handed me something she thought might be relevant to the question I had come in with. She did not adjust her behavior for my presence in the way that most people adjusted for a king, the slight formality, the awareness of being observed. She simply continued the work, which meant that my visits became, in practice, time I spent watching her work while she worked. This was, I was aware, not standard archival consultation. The mate mark at my wrist dormant since Myra's death, which was a thing I had understood as grief and had not questioned, began in those weeks to do something I recognized but had not expected. Not a blaze, not a sudden revelation, a warmth low and steady, the way a banked fire begins to surface when someone opens the flue. It started the morning. Senne first brought me the 100-year map, and I understood that the map had come from Lyra, who had found it and thought Senne's father might find it interesting, and that this was an act of attention that required knowing something about me. I looked at my wrist that morning. The mark was faintly warm. I covered it. The council noticed before I admitted anything to myself. They noticed because I had begun attending functions with a slightly different quality of attention, which is the kind of thing councils notice. The specific way a king's gaze tracks in a room changed. Devris noticed because Devris noticed everything. He said nothing, which was its own communication. 2 of the junior council members apparently spent a week speculating in lowered voices, about whether the Alpha King had developed an interest in archival records, which Devris reported to me with the flat delivery of a man who finds his colleagues occasionally trying. "They're not entirely wrong," I told Devris. He looked at me. "The archive collection is genuinely interesting," I said. "Old records, territory history." "Of course," Devris said, in the tone of a man who has held this particular conversation with kings before. The archive keeper herself remained, as far as I could tell, entirely unaware that I was watching her the way I was watching her. She was not incurious. She was one of the more curious people I had encountered, genuinely interested in most things she came across, quick to ask questions when something didn't make sense to her. But her curiosity was directed outward, at the collection, at the hold, at what SCNNE brought her each morning, and not particularly inward at what I might be thinking about her. I found this unexpectedly restful. Most people in my presence spent some portion of their attention monitoring my reactions. Lyra did not. She reacted to things because she found them interesting or not interesting, and she was not, as far as I could observe, managing my responses to her. This made her responses to me more legible than most, because they were genuine. She liked the 100-year map. She found the border road dispute records dull. She thought the old Pact Treaty annotations were fascinating, and had developed 3 hypotheses about them that she shared briefly when I asked. 3 hypotheses. None of them required my approval. The third was most interesting, and she knew it. She said so. I stood in the archive tower on a cold afternoon and thought. I have not had a conversation like this in 2 years, 3 months, and a great many days. The night before the council gathering, SCNNE came to my rooms at a time she usually did not. She stood in the doorway, small, composed, her dark hair loose for bed, holding the carved wolf she had slept with since before she could walk, which Myra had made for her. She looked at me with the careful assessment she gave important things. I opened my arms. She came in and sat beside me, and after a moment she took my hand and held it. This she did sometimes, the contact in lieu of the words. I had learned to receive it as it was meant. We sat for a while. Then she took my hand and put it flat on the table and looked at my wrist, where the mate mark was. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me. She had her mother's eyes, Myra's eyes, the same direct quality, the same calm. She pressed one small finger to the mate mark on my wrist, gently, the way you press something to test whether it is warm. "It's all right," I said, "I know." She looked at me a moment longer. Then she retrieved her carved wolf, stood up, and went back to her rooms. I sat in the quiet for a long time. The council gathering was the following afternoon. It was a routine assembly, territory reports, a provision dispute from the southern boundary pact, a record-keeping question that had come up from the archive inventory. Lyra was to present a brief summary of the collection's current state, which had been arranged by the council as part of the standard archive management process, and which I had known about and had, I was aware, arranged my schedule around being present for. The great hall was warm. The council was assembled. I was at the head of the long table. The session had been running for an hour when Devris nodded to the side door and Lyra came in with a ledger and her summary notes. She was composed, as she always was. She had, I noticed, put on a better dress than the work dress she usually wore in the archive, still practical, still simple, deep gray wool, but clearly her considered choice for the occasion. She gave her summary with the same direct quality she brought to everything. The collection scope, the organizational system she'd implemented, the cross-reference structure, the estimate of time needed for full cataloging. Clear, concise. No performance of deference and no performance of confidence either. Just the information, well organized, accurately described. The council asked 3 questions. She answered all 3 correctly and with more detail than was strictly necessary because she found the subject genuinely interesting, which was apparent, and which I found I was watching with the specific attention of a man who has been watching someone for several weeks and is still not tired of it. She finished. Devris thanked her. She moved to leave. The side door opened. Sienne came through it. She was still in her afternoon clothes, the carved wolf in the crook of her arm, the two young wolves behind her. She crossed the great hall with the deliberate, formal pace she used when she had made a decision, which I recognized. I had seen it the day she decided the healer's teas were not working and removed them from her room herself. The day she decided she preferred the east courtyard to the west and simply moved there. The formal pace of a small person who is absolutely certain of what she is doing. She walked to Lyra. Lyra had stopped, mid-turn, at Sienne's entrance. She looked at the child with the same attention she gave important things. Sienne stopped directly in front of her. She looked up at Lyra. She looked at her for a long moment, the careful assessment, weighing, deciding. The great hall was completely still. I was completely still. 30 years of governance, and I had never so completely been unable to breathe. Then Sienne reached up and took Lyra's hand. And she said, "Mama." The mate mark blazed. Both our wrists, mine and Lyra's, in the same instant, the gold of it visible even in the afternoon light of the great hall, the warmth of it not distant or gradual but immediate and absolute, a thing that had been waiting for the word that was its key and had just received it. Lyra made a small, involuntary sound, not of fear, of recognition, the sound of something landing that you have somehow known was coming without knowing you knew. The hall was completely silent. Sienne had not released Lyra's hand. She was still looking up at her with the calm certainty of a child who has done the correct thing and is waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. I stood up. I had been king of Thornville for 12 years. I had presided over councils, treaty negotiations, border disputes, a territory flood that displaced 3 packs for a winter. I was not, by temperament or training, a man who moved impulsively. I crossed the great hall. Lyra looked at me as I came. Her eyes were bright, not frightened, not calculating. That expression she had that I still did not have a name for, the one that meant she had encountered something considerably more interesting than she expected and was paying full attention to it. I stopped in front of her. Sienne stood between us, holding Lyra's hand, with the satisfied patience of someone who has done the thing she came to do and is now waiting for the adults to manage the rest. "The mark," Lyra said. She was looking at her own wrist. The mate mark was gold and warm and entirely new, and also, somehow, entirely as if it had been there all along. "Yes," I said. "How long have you?" she began. 3 weeks, I said. It started slowly, and then Sienne pressed her finger to mine last night, and I understood that it was time to stop being slow about it. Lyra looked at Sienne. Sienne looked back with the serene composure of a child who has been managing a situation and considers it now resolved. She said, "Mama," Lyra said very quietly. "I heard," I said. "She hasn't spoken for 2 years. 2 years, 3 months, and 13 days, I said. I was counting. Lyra looked at me. That expression, full attention, genuinely present, something that was beginning to be warmer than mere attention. "That's a very precise count," she said. "I have had very little else to think about," I said, "until approximately 3 weeks ago." Around us the council had gone very still in the way of people who understand they are present at something significant and are uncertain of the correct behavior. Devris, I was aware without looking, was standing at his post with the composure of a man who has served 3 kings and has decided this is the best development in several years. Lyra looked at Sienne again. "What would you like to do now?" she asked the child, in the same tone she used in the archive, genuine question, no performance. Sienne considered this. Then she took Lyra's hand more firmly and turned, with the deliberate pace, toward the door that led to the inner courtyard, the one that from the courtyard led to the tower stairs, and from the tower stairs to the archive. She looked back at me. I understood the invitation. I followed. The three of us spent the rest of that afternoon in the archive. SENNE sat at the table in her usual position and sorted document folders with the focused calm of a child who has accomplished something large and is now returning to normal business. The two young wolves were at her feet. Lyra sat at her side of the table and continued logging, because the inventory summary was due, and the work did not stop because the world had rearranged. I sat at the third side of the table, which had not previously had a chair, and which SENNE had gone and retrieved a chair from the lower floor before either of us had said anything. She placed the chair beside Lyra's side. I sat in it. The archive was quiet in the way that good workspaces are quiet, the sound of the pen, the movement of documents, occasional small sounds from the wolves. Through the north window, the afternoon light shifted toward evening. Lyra worked steadily. She said, without looking up from the ledger, "I assume there is a formal process for all of this. The council would need to be informed." "The pack protocols." "There are protocols," I said. "Devris will know them in detail." "I should know them too," she said. "If you could arrange for Devris to walk me through them." "I'll arrange it." "Thank you," she made a notation in the ledger. "Also, the cross-reference system I've set up for the archive will need a second person trained in it eventually, for continuity. I can write it out as a training document." "You can train whoever you like," I said. "Good." She handed SENNE a folder. SENNE filed it with the neat confidence of 2 months of practice. I want to be clear that I don't have any objections to what's happened, to any of it. She said this with the same directness she applied to the organizational logic of the collection, simply stating the true thing. I'm not saying that for your benefit specifically. I'm saying it because it's accurate and I prefer to be accurate. "I know," I said. "I could tell." She looked at me. "Could you?" "You don't manage your reactions," I said. "I've been watching for 3 weeks. You found the 100-year map interesting. You found the border road dispute records dull. You found the pact treaty annotations fascinating, and you had 3 hypotheses about them, and the third was the most interesting, and you knew it." "I did know it," she said. "You also," I said, "sent the map to SENNE to bring me, which means you were paying attention to what I might find interesting, which is not part of the archive keeper's formal responsibilities." Lyra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The map was genuinely good. It seemed wasteful not to share it with someone who would find it interesting." "Did you know it would be me?" "I thought it was likely," she said, in the tone of someone being honest rather than modest. "You came to the archive more than strictly necessary for consultation purposes." "Yes," I said, "I did." "I noticed that approximately 2 weeks ago," she said. "I didn't know what to do with the information." "What did you conclude?" She considered the question with the seriousness she gave real questions. "That I didn't mind," she said, "and then that I actively didn't mind, which was more informative." She made another notation. "I hadn't expected to actively not mind anything in particular when I came to THORNVIL. I came for the archive." "The archive is genuinely interesting," I said. "It is," she said, "and now it is also other things." She handed SENNE another folder. "I am not unhappy about the other things." SENNE, without looking up from her sorting, made a small sound that I had learned was her version of agreement. Lyra looked at her. Something in her face changed. The expression I was learning meant that she had been moved and was being precise about feeling it rather than performing it. She said, "Mama," she said again quietly, not to me, to herself. "Yes," I said. "She chose," Lyra said. "She's chosen everything else correctly," I said. "The organizational logic, the folders, the map. She has, it seems, excellent instincts." Lyra looked at me. Then she looked back at the ledger. She was, I was certain, not entirely keeping the expression from her face that she usually kept from her face, the expression that meant something considerably better than expected. "She does," she said. "I agree completely." The formal rite was conducted 3 weeks later, in the great hall, with the packed council assembled and old Devris officiating with the grave satisfaction of a man who has waited 2 years, 3 months, and over a month for something right to happen in this hall. Sienne stood beside us. She had spoken 4 more times in the 3 weeks between the afternoon in the archive and the rite. Not much she was not, I understood, going to become a chatty child. She was her mother's daughter and her father's daughter both, and neither of us had ever used a word we didn't need. But she had spoken, once to ask Lyra a question about a document she was cataloging, once to tell me that the wolves liked Lyra's voice when she read aloud, once to tell Devris that his record-keeping system for the provision dispute had an error in it, which it did, and once, the night before the rite, to say good night to both of us at the same time, standing in the doorway of the room where Lyra and I had been sitting talking until late. "Good night," she had said, looking at both of us. "Good night," Lyra had said. "Good night," I had said. Sienne had considered us both with the composed satisfaction of a child whose work is proceeding as intended. Then she had gone to bed. At the rite, when the words were said, and the mate mark sealed in the old way, and Lyra became the queen of Thornval, Sienne stood very straight and very still beside her. The mate marks on our wrists flared briefly, that gold warmth, absolute and settled, and the packed council bowed in the way of people who have witnessed something they understand to be correct. Devris did not bow because Devris was officiating, but he met my eyes over the assembled hall with the expression of a man who has served 3 kings and considers this by some distance the best thing that has happened on his watch. Lyra, beside me, was looking at the hall with the same quality of attention she brought to the archive, genuinely present, genuinely interested, not performing any feeling she was not having. She leaned very slightly toward me. "The hall is older than the records suggest," she said quietly. "I found a construction note in the Tower archive that predates the official founding record by 40 years. I haven't filed it yet." "Tell me at dinner," I said. "I will," she said. "I have 3 hypotheses. I expect the 3rd is most interesting." "Obviously," she said. Sienne, standing between us, reached up and took both our hands at once, her left in mine, her right in Lyra's, and held them with the easy confidence of a child who has arranged things the way they are supposed to be and sees no reason to be modest about it. She did not say anything. She didn't need to. She had said the word that started all of it in the great hall to the quiet stranger with the document cases and the 3 hypotheses and the genuine attention that never performed itself. She had said it with the certainty of a child who knew before the rest of us did, who had walked across the archive courtyard on the 3rd day, because something in her understood what the bond had not yet told me. 1 word. It was still, I thought, the most precisely correct thing anyone had said in Thornval in 2 years, 3 months, and a handful of days.